I'm really not enthusiastic about talking about the Durham report. Uh, it's one of those things where you have a hard time thinking, what is it that you can add to this that isn't already being said? Legacy media stories of this type seem to be kind of a waste of time because they really don't seem like they're likely to change anything other than the most marginal things. And that got me thinking maybe about talking about those marginal changes might be an angle other people aren't thinking of. And also maybe a little bit onto why we can't expect big changes out of things like this. So, a little bit of background is in order. So, the Clinton campaign decided it wanted an opposition research campaign against the Trump campaign centered on ties to Russia. Now, at this point, they didn't actually have anything other than maybe a few rumors that they had heard in terms of like business deals. A law firm working for the campaign, and just so you know, they picked it not because they were sure it was something they were going to find something on. It was more that Russia was the appropriate boogeyman to tie him to. So their goal was to, here's everything. Here's something Russia that everybody hates. So if we can link it to Trump, maybe we can undermine him. A law firm working for the campaign hired Fusion GPS to perform the research. Fusion GPS hired former MI6 agent Christopher Steele to look for Trump-Russia connections. Steele was former MI6. He worked at the Russian desk. He was considered to be really well versed in all things Russia. The Obama White House was briefed that they had Russian intelligence, that the Russians were aware of the Clinton campaign effort to link Trump to Russia. So this is going on during the campaign while Obama's still president. And so the intel community was aware that at least Russia thought the Clinton campaign was trying to tie Russia to Trump. Steele created the now famous Steele dossier containing various allegations, including the P-tape and the Trump campaign operatives meeting with various Russian entities. His source included Russian expats living in the U.S. Nellie Orr, who worked with Fusion GPS, passed the Steele dossier to the Justice Department through her husband, Bruce Orr, who was a prosecuting attorney there. The calls for some kind of investigation picked up steam. Christopher Steele leaked his own dossier to the U.S. press. The FBI used that the information was now showing up in the press as proof the information had been corroborated. After the election, Steele approached Senator John McCain in order to start additional avenues of investigation going. So this is where Congress would get involved with the investigation part of things. In the middle of all this, a low-level Trump campaign worker named George Papadopoulos told the low-level Australian diplomat that Russians had offered him dirt on Hillary Clinton. The diplomats reported this. It was shared with U.S. intelligence. By the way, the Australian diplomat made a point of saying that he did not consider the information particularly viable. He thought that Papadopoulos was just trying to make himself sound more important rather than actual. The story didn't play out in a way that made him believe that Papadopoulos had actually been approached by Russians. So these are all the elements that end up launching the investigations. Steele was offered $1 million if he could provide any proof to back up his assertions. He couldn't. Now, if your news sources are entirely from the left, you'll be thinking, wait a minute. I'm pretty sure the Mueller investigation indicted a whole bunch of people for Russian collusion. Didn't they? Well, kinda. There were 34 indictments from the Mueller campaign. However, they're not particularly spectacular. They were as follows. 13 Russians who were hackers with no known ties to the Trump campaign. 12 Russian intelligence officers who were linked to the stolen files from the DNC, but with no links to the Trump campaign. Paul Manafort, who was a campaign operative for financial crimes in Ukraine, not paying taxes, etc. Konstantin Kilmilnik, linked to Manafort for work in the Ukraine, charged with obstruction of justice about the work he and Manafort did. Roger Stone for lying to Congress, and Michael Flynn lying to the FBI about speaking to the Russian ambassador, which, by the way, speaking to the Russian ambassador was not illegal. When the FBI approached him about it, he didn't answer the questions based on the information they had got from tapping the phone conversations between him and the ambassador, and thus he ended up getting tagged with lying to the FBI. Rick Gates for lying to investigators, Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, for lying to investigators and financial crimes, George Papadopoulos, who I mentioned before, lying to investigators, Alex Vanderswan, lying to investigators, Richard Pinedo, identity theft, Sam Patton failing to register as a foreign lobbyist, and Bijan Kian and Skim Alptekin, charged with conspiring to violate lobbying laws on behalf of Turkey. So, and you'll hear, the reason I mention those is because a lot of the papers are basically saying, and when I say papers, I mean all sources. The various sources on the left are saying, well, look, the Durham report had no indictments or a single one that didn't pan out. And there were 34 indictments out of the Mueller report. Well, those are the indictments. Nothing particularly impressive. So what was the Durham report really about? Well, Durham was tasked as a special prosecutor to determine how campaign opposition research in the form of unsupported allegations turned into one of the biggest investigations launched by the U.S. intelligence community. The key findings were that many of the players in the FBI were completely aware of the origins of the information and that it was likely false. The texts and emails of these key players make it clear that they felt damaging or taking down Trump was more important than what the actual contents of the allegations were. Now, I'm going to steal stuff here from the Daily Wire. They did a good job kind of walking through the gist of it, just get a feel for it. Now, if you're a lefty going, oh, Daily Wire, well, you have to understand how the right side looks at it to make sense of it. So their take on it works. So, quoting from a Daily Wire article, at the time of the opening of Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI did not possess any intelligence showing that anyone associated with the Trump campaign was in contact with Russian intelligence officers at any point during the campaign. Upon receipt of unevaluated intelligence information from Australia, the FBI swiftly opened the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, in particular at the direction of Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence Peter Strzok opened Crossfire Hurricane immediately. Strzok, at a minimum, had a pronounced hostile feeling toward Trump. The matter was opened as a full investigation without ever having spoken to the persons who provided the information. Further, the FBI did so without any significant review of its own intelligence databases, collection of the examination of any relevant information and intelligence from other intelligence source entities, or interviews of witnesses essential to understand the raw information it had received, and also using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed by the FBI in evaluating raw intelligence. The FBI learned that Steele relied primarily on a US-based Russian national, Igor Danchenko, to collect information that ultimately formed the core allegations found in the report. Specifically, our investigation discovered that Danchenko himself had told another person that Danchenko was responsible for 80% of the intel and 50% of the analysis contained in the Steele dossier. By the way, this Danchenko was also fingered previously as possibly being a Russian intelligence asset because he had been mingling with interns going to the CIA and FBI, basically asking them outright if they found themselves in a position where they needed money. He knew people who would buy the information. So, and actually the FBI briefly investigated him before they lost track of him. So that was their main source through Steele. The FBI conducted multiple interviews of Danchenko regarding, among other things, the information he provided to Steele. It said Danchenko was unable to provide any corroborating evidence to support the Steele allegations, and further described his interactions with his subsources as rumor and speculation and conversations of a casual nature. Now, the conservative press is out there demanding massive action. That's never going to come. Republican politicians are putting out fundraising letters suggesting that if you cough up $20 to them, that somehow justice will be served. Now, the FBI came back from all this and essentially said, whoops, our bad. We learned our lessons and we won't make those same mistakes again. So they're basically saying, we changed the way we do things, so that we're not going to goof up like that ever again. So nobody has to be punished. No worries. The Republican conservative movement will experience little change from this. People like Sean Hannity and Mark Levine will merely acknowledge that, yep, there's some bad apples in that extra-constitutional organization, but surely the FBI can be fixed and brought back to its former glory with some kind of unspecified reform. And I've kind of a special ire for Sean Hannity on this particular one, because when this whole thing kicked off, he was going off endlessly about the Durham report and how essentially all these people were going to be, I mean, he didn't quite say perp walked, but he inferred that there were going to be a lot of indictments and a lot of people were going to be brought to justice, which never happened. So him cheerleading the current Republican investigations going on in Congress doesn't fill me with any particular amount of confidence. Now, most people on the left are going to be either unaware that anything has happened at all, and to essentially paraphrase what the LA Times reaction to the Durham report was, essentially they were kind of like, yawn, over 300 pages. We know there was collusion because of the Mueller indictments. Nothing to see here. And this is probably a really good example to look at why we have such a huge problem in our country right now in terms of information. On the right, they're looking at this and seeing it as, the absolute assertion that there's massive corruption and nothing's being done about it. On the left, most people are oblivious to this actually happening, and the few people who are aware of it have no reason to look any further into the Durham report because they're being told it's nothing. So the question is there any good news out of this at all? And the answer is at the margin. From even economics, all changes occur at the margin, so it's important to know what's going on at the margin. What's going to happen that's good? Well, I think a few conservatives will conclude that the FBI is bad and probably needs to be eliminated. I'm starting to hear some congressmen basically saying the FBI needs to be pretty much torn to the ground and possibly rebuilt or replaced with something completely different. That's a good sign. So a few notable people making that realization is an improvement of affairs. And on the left, there'll be a few people. There'll be people akin to what's happened with Bill Maher, who's realizing that the left isn't what it used to be, and it's starting to frighten him, at least in terms of free speech. Well, some on the left will actually look into this Durham report and say, well, by golly, these people are talking about it. I'm just going to make them look like idiots and actually find out what's in it. And if they do check into this, they'll realize that if the security state can do this to Trump, they can do it to anyone. They could do it to Bernie. They could do it to RFK Jr., or they could do it to any other outsider hopeful who dares to try to become president without the establishment's approval. And the process of things changing at the margin is also always glacial and painful, but it is occurring. So it'll tweak a few people. It's not going to change the world. So that's my take on the Durham report. What do you think? Do you think that there's going to be any major changes? Do you think I'm wrong on that? Please comment below. What do you think about the odds of the margin? Have you heard any significant people on the right or left who sound like they've been nudged a little bit in the right direction because of this? Comment below. Be interested to hear about that. If you've been brought to my channel and you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Look at my titles of content. I get into all kinds of different things out there, from history to philosophy to current events to movie and TV show reviews, etc. If there's somebody out there you think might find this interesting, please consider sharing it with them. And please smash the like button. I appreciate you spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.